You can do everything right and still end up broke because the system never rewarded effort in the first place. In 2026, while you are being told to hustle harder, the people who already own assets are quietly changing the rules, using AI, cheap money, and legal loopholes to get richer no matter what you do. This is not financial advice, this is financial education. I want to explain a mindset that sounds inspiring until you put it next to real numbers, real job loss, real rent increases, and real retirement failures. We are going to talk about what made a legendary Chinese businessman, Li Jiacheng, in the story you are probably familiar with, willing to keep working even when he could have stopped. And then I am going to connect that to the kind of freedom you can realistically pursue before 30, in a world where just learn to code is no longer a plan, and where your purchasing power is still bleeding even after the headlines say inflation is cooling. Because in 2026, the problem is not that money is hard to get. The problem is that money has been separated from normal effort. Wages are tied to jobs. Jobs are being automated. Your rent is tied to housing scarcity. Scarcity is being engineered by policy and speculation. Meanwhile, the stock market and asset prices have been treated like a national priority, while regular people get treated like a footnote. If you want a cold answer for why your life feels harder every year, it is because your rewards are falling behind, not because you are failing. So here is what you will learn. First, the inner weakness that keeps you trapped in safe choices, not because you are weak, but because your brain learned to protect itself with comforting beliefs. Second, the discipline of information, how people who get rich do not just work harder, they work smarter with what they pay attention to. Third, the uncomfortable truth that financial freedom is not a number you reach, it is a structure you build, and in 2026 you do not build that structure with wishful thinking. Fourth, why the idea of retiring early is often sold as a dream, but the people who actually win tend to keep operating longer than you expect, and you will see how this connects to AI disruption, Federal Reserve decisions, wealth concentration, housing, and the retirement cliff that is not an abstract threat anymore. And you might be asking, why should anyone care about an old story of entrepreneurship? Because it is not an old story. It is a mirror. In 2026, AI is eating the middle-class job ladder at a speed that makes the old advice obsolete. You are being told to become more employable, while the tools are being built to replace employability itself. You are being told to save more, while the cost of living climbs and the interest rate environment punishes you for being late to the game. You are being told to invest for the long term, while the top 1% keeps owning more of the long term. You are being told that crypto is freedom, while regulation and institutional buying quietly pull the steering wheel out of retail hands. So yes, this story matters. Not for the romance, for the mechanics. Let me start with the first mechanism, the one nobody wants to say out loud. Many people do not stay poor because they do not want money. They stay poor because they do not want to feel exposed. Exposed to failure, exposed to judgment, exposed to uncertainty. Your mind chooses the predictable cage over the risky door. And here is the part nobody wants to say. If your inner identity is "I am just a normal person," you will keep filtering opportunities until only normal outcomes remain. You will argue with yourself like it is a debate club. You will look for reasons to believe your constraints are permanent. Even when you know better, your brain will defend the storyline that keeps your anxiety manageable. You can see this pattern in daily life. A person complains about rent, then refuses to learn anything about business cash flow. A person complains about inflation, then invests like a gambler because they want comfort, not structure. A person complains about AI replacing jobs, then chooses a training path that assumes their human labor will still matter in 3 years. Comfort feels like safety, and safety feels like maturity, but it is really surrender wearing a suit. Now think about how this hits in 2026. The Federal Reserve can cut rates, raise rates, pause, signal, reassure, and stabilize. You can read every headline and still feel nothing improve because your real purchasing power depends on wages catching up, and wages do not catch up just because a press conference ended. A nurse who got $30 an hour 5 years ago does not suddenly have a better life because the internet says inflation is down. Their bills do not go down at the same speed as the statistics. Their paycheck is still behind. Their housing payment still eats the majority of their monthly income. Real life does not track to graphs. It tracks to rent, insurance, groceries, and healthcare. And while you feel that squeeze, the asset owners feel something else. In many periods, when rates drop or expectations stabilize, asset prices can surge. That is how wealth grows for people who already own. They are not just investing, They are borrowing, repositioning, and accumulating through mechanisms most people never learn. They do not need to fight for an entry-level salary. They can earn from ownership. So what does this inner mindset have to do with freedom before 30? Everything. Because the inner person decides your outer actions. If you believe you are ordinary, you will choose ordinary behavior. If you believe you are stuck, you will avoid the painful experiments that lead to leverage. If you believe hard work alone will save you, you will keep doing the wrong kind of hard work. I want you to picture a micro story. Imagine a 30-year-old named David. He is a nurse. He loves his job. He is not lazy. He is not stupid. He did not choose his life because he hates money. He chose it because he wanted stability and meaning. He works shifts, gets burned out, but pays the bills. Then an insurance premium jumps again. Then his rent rises. Then a new hospital contract changes staffing. The next year his overtime shrinks. He does everything right in the only way he knows. He keeps showing up. Now place AI into his world. Not Hollywood AI, but the boring AI systems that schedule care, automate paperwork, and replace certain roles with software. David does not lose his nursing license. He loses hours. He loses certain tasks. He loses the overtime that made the bills tolerable. And the scary part is that the hospital can claim efficiency as progress. They are not villains with a mustache. They are just rational managers under cost pressure. David goes online and searches for answers. He finds advice like, learn to code, start a side hustle, invest in index funds, cut expenses, all reasonable words. But none of it addresses the real question. How do you build income that is not scheduled by someone else's staffing model, someone else's wage budget, someone else's software roadmap? That is what early financial freedom really means in 2026. Not be lucky, not find the one stock, not manifest. It means building a cash flow engine that can survive job disruption. It means ownership, business leverage, and asset-backed income. And to build that engine, you need inner discipline, because you will face fear and delay and rejection from the world before you see results. So the first principle from the Li Jiacheng story that matters is not dream big. It is dream with a spine. He quit jobs multiple times even when he had status, and that takes an inner certainty most people lack. He could walk away from a role, from a title, from a comfortable salary. Most people cannot. Not because they are weak, but because they are emotionally addicted to the identity of employment. In 2026, this matters because employment is being devalued, not just automated. A job is not a promise anymore. A job is a contract with a termination date. They did not tell you that clearly enough. They sold you stability like it is a product you can buy with effort. But stability was always an illusion for most people. It was just quieter until now. AI changes the rhythm. It shortens the time between skill acquisition and obsolescence. Now the second principle is the discipline of information. The rich do not just work, they select. They do not consume everything. They steal their time back from irrelevant content. In the story there is this idea of raw knowledge, the notion that you should fight for the right information instead of passively accepting what people hand you. That is not mystical, it is a real cognitive advantage. If you have limited time, and most people waste it on content that feels productive but teaches nothing useful, then you can outcompete them simply by choosing better inputs. In 2026, that is even more important because information is drowning you. You are not just scrolling, you are being monetized while you scroll. Platforms reward attention. Attention is not the same thing as wisdom. And AI recommendation systems do not care about your future. They care about engagement. So ask yourself, when was the last time you read something that directly improved your ability to create income? Not news, not motivational quotes. Something that changed how you calculated margins, how you built distribution, how you understood customer acquisition costs, how you priced a product, how you negotiated, how you measured retention. Most people cannot answer that because their consumption is entertainment disguised as learning. In the story, the person reads broadly but finishes what matters. He skims irrelevant material, but he fully studies what relates to his profession. That is a filter. It is also a habit of commitment, because commitment to information turns into decision advantage. Here is the dark connection to 2026. AI lets you get information faster, but it also lets you fake progress faster. You can watch 10 tutorials and feel smarter while building nothing. You can prompt an AI tool and get answers that sound correct, while missing real constraints like customer demand, regulatory friction, logistics costs, and distribution. So your information advantage is only real if it becomes a competence advantage. Otherwise, you get the illusion of growth. Let me give you a second micro story. A 28-year-old named Sarah thinks she wants financial freedom. She starts a content business. She watches videos about algorithms. She learns the vocabulary. She uses AI to generate posts. She gets some likes. She gets some comments. She feels busy. Then a month later, when rent comes due, she discovers the brutal truth that most creator economy advice never says out loud. In 2026, most people making content earn $0 or close to it. A small number earn enough to live. The rest are subsidizing the platform ecosystem with their time and attention. Meanwhile, institutions quietly professionalize creation through advertising networks and data-driven targeting. The freedom is often an illusion because your income is not owned. It is platform dependent and audience dependent. This is the creator economy trap. It looks like entrepreneurship but acts like wage labor with a different boss. You do not own the channel. You do not own distribution. You do not own the algorithm. And you definitely do not own the cash flow. You can work your entire life and still have no financial exit. Sarah learns this lesson the hard way, by trying to build a brand that never becomes a business. She then pivots, but pivoting costs money. Pivoting costs time. Pivoting costs energy. And that is why information discipline matters. Instead of learning everything, she needed to learn the one thing that generates revenue: how to sell a valuable outcome to a specific customer segment, with measurable margins, with distribution that does not disappear overnight. That brings us to the third principle: build a business plan based on leverage, not labor. The story emphasizes entrepreneurship because employment alone cannot create the wealth scale most people imagine. That is harsh, but in 2026 it is not an exaggeration. AI is reshaping what roles are worth. It is pushing more tasks into automation. It is squeezing middle wage positions, and it is doing it while the cost of living refuses to stay still. You can feel this in the housing market too. Housing prices in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia detached from wages years ago. The people who bought earlier benefited from appreciation. The people who came later got stuck with mortgage burdens that grow faster than their paychecks. When rates shift, it is not a gentle adjustment, it is a cliff. Higher mortgage rates can instantly price out buyers, but rent does not collapse. It rises because people move from buying to renting. So while you chase the fantasy of saving your way to ownership, the asset market keeps moving. That is why generations can rent forever. It is not because they lack willpower, it is because the math is brutal. Now connect this to the Federal Reserve. When the Fed keeps interest rates higher, it affects everything through borrowing costs. That includes housing affordability, business lending, and consumer credit. But the most important detail for you is this: asset owners can adapt, they can refinance, they can borrow against existing holdings, and they can use lower cost capital relative to their wealth. Regular wage earners cannot. You pay monthly, they play portfolio. This is why wealth concentration accelerates. The top 1% does not just save more, they access capital structures that compound. According to widely cited data from wealth distribution studies and Federal Reserve-linked reporting, wealth is increasingly concentrated, and that concentration interacts with policy and rates. You can be working all day and still be losing to compounding structures you cannot touch. So, the third principle from the story, even if it is phrased like traditional entrepreneurship, becomes a 2026 survival rule. You need income streams that do not depend on trading your hours for money at the same rate forever. You need something that grows without linear time. In the story, there is a shift from small business to automation, from labor to systems, from reliance on being present to building operations that continue without him. That is the essence. Automation is not only about replacing humans, it is about replacing your dependence. In 2026, you can use AI tools, but the bigger advantage is not the tool, the bigger advantage is process. The people who get rich create systems, then use their time for learning and scaling. Now, the story also describes internet mobile economy, emphasizing how platforms reduce costs and how many digital services are essentially free to use in the marginal sense. That logic is real, but in 2026, you need to update it with the darker truth. Platforms also capture value. They sell advertising to businesses, and they monetize your content and your attention. So the opportunity is real, but you cannot be naive about who gets paid. In practice, early freedom before 30 requires you to build a business where you control distribution channels, or at least control the relationship with customers. You can use social media, but you should not rely on it for your existence. You should be building something that has direct revenue mechanics. You need cash flow, you need conversion, you need retention. Without that, your platform presence is just exposure, not income. And that is where the story sets up the fourth principle, the one that gets twisted by motivational content. It is the idea of responsibility, the reason people keep working instead of quitting and calling it freedom. You might think freedom is the absence of work. But watch the real winners and you will see something else. They work longer than you expect, not because they cannot stop, but because they choose to carry responsibility. Now here is the brutal truth. When you are poor, responsibility feels like punishment. When you are building a real cash flow engine, responsibility becomes the engine of focus. You do not get to escape your choices. If you do not deliver value, customers leave. If you do not pay employees, they quit. If you do not maintain partners, your supply chain breaks. Responsibility is not just a moral story, it is a business feedback loop. In 2026, that matters more because the market is less forgiving. Businesses fail faster. Insurance markets are collapsing in some regions because climate-driven disasters are no longer rare events. Migration costs and infrastructure stress are turning economic friction into a permanent background noise. That means your business has to withstand shocks. The people who learn to operate under pressure survive longer. Now I want to return to the early question that started the whole story. Why would someone who is already rich keep working until extremely old age? The naive answer is ego. The naive answer is greed. But the story's deeper answer is that wealth did not produce freedom the way people assume. It produced responsibility, meaning the business had become a network of people relying on it. That network becomes a reason to keep showing up, and you need to understand this because most people misunderstand financial freedom. They think it is a switch you flip when your account hits a number, but in real life, especially in 2026, a number is not a structure, a number is not a safety system, a number does not protect you from job loss, from housing shocks, from medical bills, from family emergencies, from market crashes, from regulatory changes, from platform algorithm updates, from climate events. So when you chase freedom without building structure, you get a false sense of safety, and then one event breaks you. You see this all the time with people who spend their 20s building skills that only work in one job market. When AI changes the market, they do not have an exit. They become dependents again. This is where the retirement crisis enters the room. In many Western countries, retirement age keeps getting pushed back. Social security systems face funding gaps. Pensions are underfunded. People are living longer, but the safety nets were designed for different demographics. In other words, you are being asked to rely on systems that were already stressed before AI and climate disruptions arrived. So early financial freedom is not just about wealth for pleasure, it is about optionality. It is about the power to say no. It is about the ability to move without panic. It is about not having to wait until retirement to start living. Now we have to talk about the darkest part, the part that turns the inspiration into a warning.